tonight, John News secures a detailed blow-by-blow reaction from former President Rawlings to controversial working with Rawlings book with some jaw-dropping revelations detailing his sour relationship with the late Professor Mills. We have exclusive details for you here on Top Story. Plus later, military on a hand for individuals accused of brutalizing two soldiers in a community in the south. We have been to the community where armed soldiers have mounted checkpoints with many residents fleeing.
The leader didn't ask our president to find out what am I doing? Am I a criminal or what? I came here on my own. They didn't ask. What they do is that they let keep on beating me.
And Top Story is always brought to you by Gas and Cement, the nation builder, and Vodafone. The future is exciting. Ready.
This is Top Story with Evans Mensah.
Two major stories we're following for you tonight, but none bigger than the securing of the detailed blow-by-blow reaction from former President Rawlings to the controversial working with Rawlings book with some jaw-dropping revelations detailing his sour relationship with the late Professor Mills. I'm pretty sure you have followed Professor Kwame Nkrumah's book and the controversies that it has raised. Well, tonight, the former president is having his say in a detailed reaction copy to John News, 11-page reaction taking on every particular issue that you've heard about as far as it relates to him tonight. We're going to go through that for you. Stay with us because there's a lot to go through. Just dropped on our lap a few minutes ago from the office of Flight Lieutenant Jerry John Rawlings, retired former president, of course, who has been incensed by the claims made in that book. My colleague Elton Bobe has been studying this very detailed reaction that we secured a few minutes back. And he starts, Elton, with the issues captured in the book as it relates to his relationship with the late Professor Mills.
Right, Evans. And for a start, let me give our listeners pointers as to what to look forward to. Now, the first is the Mills private call to Mr. Rawlings, the 2008 NDC campaign. Ata Kwabenakuma, also known as the Ata Mocheman. That issue also featured prominently in the book. Rawlings, his vision and legacy, as well as Rawlings, founder of the Fourth Republic, Nana Kunedu and the NDC sacrifice and betrayal, April 2000 Congress. He also talks about the Efia Nigba Ada incident involving Nana Kunedu and Rawlings and the wife of the late Professor Mills, as well as the 2011 primaries, and he ends with his personal opinions. So these are what we're going to tell our listeners this evening.
There's a lot to go through.
Response to Professor Kwame Nkrumah. Now let's talk about Mills and that call to the former president. According to the statement, after his landslide victory in the 2006 NDC primaries, candidate Mills traveled to South Africa for his medical treatment. Whilst in South Africa, Mills put a call through to the President Rawlings and indicated his desire to forego the candidature for the presidential election owing to his medical state. Now, following this conversation, President Rawlings held a meeting with some leading members of the party to express concern about the state of the candidate Mills' health and urged them to identify recognizable party members who could step in. President Rawlings is on record as having suggested that some known personalities in the party should position themselves to demonstrate that the NDC had enough presidential material.
Now, this particular incident is important, and I recall, Koko Aidoho will bear witness to this. I spoke on Newsnight on that fateful day, 2016. There was a lot of rumors on that day that the late former president had passed. He had traveled to South Africa, and the rumors that he had traveled to get some medical attention.
Right.
And the rumors were all over on social media. There were, rumors circulating, and we managed to call him from South Africa, and we asked him the question that, the claims are that you're dead. And then he says, I remember his reaction to one of those interviews you never forget. And he says that I'm not talking to you from a cemetery. I am well and alive. Apparently, from what Mr. Rawlings is recounting here, on that trip, the late president calls him to say, well, I am not well, and I want to step aside. I want to simply step aside as president because of my health condition. Sure. And then he then moves ahead to say, okay, if you're going to step aside because you're not well, we need to find replacement for you within the NDC who can step in. That's Rawlings' claim.
Right. And the response from Mr. Rawlings goes on to say that Kwame Ahoy has written a lengthy diatribe about how Rawlings coerced his brother Ato Ahoy to contest Mills ahead of the primaries, leading to the breakdown of their healthy relationship. Now, he says that it should be stated on record that President Rawlings took the responsibility and pragmatic approach after he received that politically unnerving call from Professor Mills. He consulted the party leadership to take strategic steps to fill the gap, which, by Professor Mills' own account, was eminent in going forward. Now, urging some members of the party to position themselves for a potential contest was in no way an attempt to undermine, sabotage, betray, or malign Professor Mills, as the author shamelessly inferred in his book.
Because that's what it said in the book. That former President Rawlings was undermining him and had consulted Mr. Ato Ahoy to sort of take over from then leader of the party, Professor Mills.
Now he goes on to say the more disappointing is the impression created that he was and is unaware of the critical phone call from Professor Mills whilst in South Africa to President Rawlings. It is rather telling of him to deny this well-known crisis merely in his bid to derail and denigrate the genuine effort of former President Rawlings to arrest a crisis.
Okay, so I mean, the question to ask is, did Professor Kwame Ahoy know of this particular call to former President Rawlings that then he says triggered his calls to other people to try and find replacement for Professor Mills?
Sure. And there's further revelation on this. According to Mr. Rawlings, when Professor Mills returned to Ghana, meetings were held with him without the knowledge or participation of President Rawlings, where Professor Mills was convinced by those present not to withdraw his candidature and actually made to believe that President Rawlings was working to undermine him. That was when the mistrust began.
Okay, so this is an interesting point. And because the relationship wasn't. Now he tells us what possibly happened and that relationship fell apart.
And according to Mr. Rawlings, Mr. Kwame Ahoy was and is well known to be one of the master architects of that manipulative agenda that pushed a very unwell candidate Mills into the 2008 general election.
This is a big one. He says, I want to restate that. That was when the mistrust began, and Mr. Kwame Ahoy was and is well known to be one of the master architects of that manipulative agenda that pushed a very unwell candidate Mills into the 2020 general elections. Everybody remembers that famous scene at the airport, when Professor Mills returned from a trip and jogged on the tarmac to show that he was still well, and people criticized it. Former president criticized it. His former President Rawlings is telling us for the first time here that the people, he alleges, all this is allegation because it was word against the word of Mr. Ahoy, that people pushed him. They knew very well he wasn't well. They pushed him to election. Election he won, by the way.
He won.
He became president.
Yeah. So he goes on to say that at no point did he, Mr. Rawlings, support Professor Mills in his bid for the presidency, with the aim or intention to manipulate Professor Mills should he become president, despite the attempt of various individuals to peddle falsehood and sow disunity. Now, for him, having worked with Professor Mills on various policy and manifesto achievements during his presidency, the aim was support him and the NDC party back into government for the good work of the pre-2000 NDC administration to continue. And after 19 years of working alongside various individuals with different motives and political beliefs, including his political opponents, he, President Rawlings, had acquired enough experience in people management not to be unsophisticated in his relationship with Professor Mills, as the book seeks to misinform.
Okay, and now this part is important because it then goes ahead to lay out why he fell out and some of the issues that really caused this. It says President Rawlings was critical of President Mills' administration. There is no denying that. I think that is very well known. in unusual manner, this was done openly and with the best of intentions. He had meetings with President Mills offering counsel and suggestions strictly to the good of Mills's presidency and that of his government. Now, Rawlings has always remained consistent in his open and bona fide criticisms of President Mills's administration, which to date are still outstanding matters. These include, and then he goes to list them. First, the failure of the Mills government to investigate the assassination of the Yana and 40 of his elders. President Mills's inability to look into the death of Haji Issa Bobila, the late Northern Regional Chairman of the CPP. 3, the failure of the Mills government to investigate and prosecute genuine fraudulent activities within President Kufuor's administration. So this is important. One of the key reasons why he did not like Professor Mills's administration at all is because he, in his view, President Mills failed to prosecute people in President Kufuor's administration. And by the way,
I told in the book,
yes,
that Professor Mills did not want to do this, but he didn't do this.
Yes,
according to Mr. Kwame Nahoy.
Yes. Now, 4, the lack of dedication to the party ideals of probity and accountability, as well as the monetization of the NDC internal electoral processes. So now we know what really the issues were.
Let's focus a bit now on the 2008 NDC campaign.
That is a big one.
Now, according to Mr. Rawlings, in his bid to justify his version of events, the author goes as far as stating that he, President Rawlings, was visibly absent from the 2008 national election campaign without needing to belabor a well-known and publicized fact. This account is absolutely false, according to him. He said he and his wife, Nana Dajiman Rawlings, traveled extensively to campaign for candidate Mills, and these campaigns were covered by the media and a matter of public record. So this is about the 2008 campaign. He mentions some of the towns.
He claims that they were integral part. He said he started his campaign in Sankore. So this is him just detailing what he did to discount. He says, lest we forget, Admiral Wusu Ansah, a courageous and patriotic member of the NDC, who, in spite of his failing health, joined the campaign trail, shunning the comforts of his home in Accra in order to have Mills elected. This is a tribute to Admiral Wusu, and he gives shout-outs to him, as they say. He says, unsurprisingly, the author is unaware of the campaign presence of the former president during the 2008 elections. Okay, so that is him trying to deal with that claim that was made. Then there's this
issue about
Atamabana Kuma. This is that's another famous one.
That's another famous one.
What's Mr. Rawlings'
the response that the entire reference to Atademochiman by the author is obviously ill-intentioned, unresearched, and yet another attempt to dramatize the well-orchestrated divide in his Rawlings versus Atta Mills tale. Now, the statement he made about Atta Mills was at an NDC National Executive Congress in the Northern Regional Capital, Tamale, where Professor Mills was then sitting president. Now, Atta Kwabena Kuma, popularly known as Atta Demochiman, was a good friend of Mr. Rawlings, who worked at the 37 Military Hospital, the anatomical pathological unit for about 40 years. He sadly passed away in July 2011 at age 82. They have known each other for close to 40 years, during which Atta Kuma will regale Mr. Rawlings with his life stories, and Rawlings would do same. Now, at the introduction of his address at the 2010 NDC Congress in Tamale, Mr. Rawlings cracked a joke, as is known to do, recounting one of his many interactions with Atta Kuma, which got the entire audience laughing and relaxed in anticipation of a more serious task ahead and the election of the national executives. The particular non-incident has been clarified on many occasions that one has only take time to find resources for clarification. It's rather unfortunate, according to him, that even a light-hearted joke that had the intended effects of diffusing the tensions usually experienced at party congresses has been twisted into yet another Mills versus Rawlings affair 10 years ago. Clearly, he says, we can all see who seeks the perpetual disunity and failure of the NDC once operating from the shadows and are clearly in the light.
Now, there was also a statement of what President Rawlings' legacy really was as a president over time. Now, here, this is Mr. Rawlings now listing for us what his key achievements were in his, first of all, 8 years. I mean, from 1992 to 2000.
And then 2000.
And then, 2000. So let's go through them. He says, institution of a local government structure. Right, it names that as an achievement, a clear, empowering process that has successfully been embraced by all Ghanaians. That's one. He talks about 2, rural electrification project that ensured that most parts of Ghana were provided with electricity, recognizing the benefits that provision will add to socio-economic development. And of course, this will be subject to some interrogation going forward. Prior to the era, this is 3, prior to the era of Rawlings, traveling from southern Ghana to northern Ghana took days. After major roads were constructed to link most parts of the northern region to the south half of Ghana, we became one unified country, not just in name, but also accessibility. And Rawlings is laying claim to this as an achievement. He also talks about championing of women's development and affirmative action. Specifically, the results are there for all to see, he said. And Nakoredu, Ajima Rawlings, and the 31st December Women's Movement were instrumental in agricultural developments. And they said food security was a priority as well. He actually puts out statistics to back the achievements he chalked there. He says the third highest achievement in the record after Jordan, 157%. China, it just talks about increasing food production by some 148%. The introduction of sustainable economic policies that led to increased productivity, revival of the Ghana Export Promotion Council, massive developments in health across the country. So, and of course, establishment of the Kolibu Radiotherapy Center. So this is Mr. Rawlings. Now,
talking about his legacy.
His achievement.
Whether or not he was in favor of the 1992 Constitution or whether it was forced on him. Now, his response is that he has never showed away from stating that he is not a supporter of multi-party democracy because it tends to allow a minority to manipulate and rule the majority and brings about division. Now, in spite of a strong reservation, he still accepted the integrity of the information from his team to adopt the multi-party system of democratic governance and actually stood as a presidential candidate in both the 1992 and 1996 elections. Due to his faith in his team and desire to prioritize the national development agenda, he chose not to exercise his veto as a head of state despite his reservations about multi-party system. And former President again says that he set an admirable record on the content by willingly and smoothly handing over power in 2001 to Mr. Kufuor when his party lost the 2000 general elections. The continent is currently strewn with leaders who have entrenched their stay after their constitutionally obligated terms. Amending the constitution, rigging election, or simply refusing to step down. And perhaps we can now delve into the issue.
I mean, this next part is the part that intrigues me the most. It's his defense of his wife, Nana Komedo Ajiman Rawlings, because in the book he was described as she I'm talking about the Nana Komedo Ajiman Rawlings was described in some less than palatable words in the book, how she facilitated the falling out between Rawlings and some of his close associates. Listen to what former President Rawlings says about the contribution of Nana Komedo Ajiman Rawlings to the NDC successes and the country's development. He says, quote, "The raw hard work, strategy and organizational talent that Nana Komedo applied to build and propel the NDC to countless victories can never be eroded. The various attempts to not just discount the central role she played, but to also deride her is symptomatic of the myopic selfishness of characters within the NDC who cannot appreciate the fact that in so doing, to pioneers of the party like herself and others, you have no history to speak of." He says, "To peddle falsehoods in the name of hearsay as a justification for the blatant lies in the book is unbecoming of an academician, albeit with the sole intention of creating the impression that Nana Komedo had a role to play in the so-called Rawlings versus Mills tale." He goes on to state, Nana Komedo played an integral role in the development of both the PNDC and the NDC, and the attempts by the author to denigrate her and nullify the key strategic and organizational role she played is yet another disappointment of the book. He says, when the Srodro Declaration, remember that,
very important, whether or not Nana Komedo had any intention of contesting the 2000 elections,
exactly, was made, Nana Komedo Ajiman Rawlings had in fact been out of Ghana for several months working on a women's health project for the World Health Organization. A fact the author could quite easily have verified were he or any of his proofreaders inclined to do so. She was informed about the declaration while she was abroad. Surely, logic would indicate that that had she any intention to contest that election, she would have been in the country campaigning, or at the very least have set in motion her campaign machinery with which to achieve her presidential objectives. At no point did she indicate to President Rawlings or members of the party that she had any intention or inclination to be the flag bearer of the party. On her return to the country, she rapidly rolled out her campaign strategy and machinery in support of President Mills. Yet another fact that could easily and publicly be verified, because the claim in the book was that somehow the attempt had been made by the Rawlingses to get in 2000 to get the wife to run and contest.
Now let's look at the relationship that exists between Edmund Rawlings and wife of the late Professor Mills.
That's another one. That's another one,
because in the book reference is made of this Fianiba Ada incident, and that may have been the genesis of.
What incident is that? Did they explain what that is?
The book did not state exactly what happened there, but I think Mr. Rawlings has provided some perspective to this particular matter. And according to him, in 2000, the Vice President Mills had been confirmed as a candidate for the NDC. Nana Akufo-Addo, as part of a political campaign for the party, created a program for the Greater Accra region. One of the events was the opening of a school in Afianigba, Ada, which she invited Mrs. Mills to commission to officially door her to the Dangbe community. Although protocol arranged for the First Lady and Vice President wife to travel together, Mrs. Mills decided to take the lead on the journey. One of the architects that J.J. Rawlings insisted upon at public events, which then became custom, was not to drive into Deva grounds, thereby whipping up dust onto the chiefs, royalty, and the community. It therefore became an outspoken rule since the 1980s that government officials arriving at any function were to alight from their vehicles at the periphery of the Deva grounds and walk onto the grounds. When Mrs. Mills arrived at the Deva grounds at Afianigba, her convoy, in an attempt to drive onto the sandy Deva grounds, was frantically flagged down and stopped by a police officer assigned to the function. Mrs. Mills, in a fury, demanded the reason for this. The police officer proceeded to explain the rationale for stopping her car, which unfortunately did little to diffuse the situation, and she said she was leaving. The 31st December ladies that organized the event frantically went on their knees to apologize to the Vice President's wife and begged her to stay. This was in the full view of chiefs and people gathered. Nana Akufo-Addo eventually arrived at the venue, to the sight of some elderly organizers on their knees pleading with Mrs. Mills, who was clearly upset. Nana Akufo-Addo inquired as to what had transpired and was briefed by the organizers. In an attempt to de-escalate the situation, Nana Akufo-Addo apologized to Mrs. Mills on their behalf and explained that all manner of hiccups occurred at public events, but that should not bother her. When Nana Akufo-Addo proceeded to greet the chiefs and people present, she was met by shocked chiefs, queen mothers, and their subjects, all of whom could have been located to collaborate with the incident. Was the author so inclined? In the days that followed, it came to light that the police officer in question and his colleagues present were transferred outside of Greater Accra. One of the officers wrote a report to the IGP Peter Namfuri, who also reported the entire matter to President Rawlings. Shocked and upset at the entire incident, President Rawlings asked Vice President Mills why he would issue such instructions against the officers when they are just doing their jobs. The transfer was subsequently reversed, and Evans, according to the former president, Nana Akufo-Addo was still on her regional campaigns for the NDC. Vice President Mills, unaware of the demotion, transfers, and subsequent discussions taking place in Accra.
So she had nothing to do with it?
Yes. So whilst in Cape Coast, the then regional minister, Jehu Appiah, and two other persons met with her to inquire as to her knowledge of the incident. She narrated it, and they expressed surprise at such trivial incident taking this time. Kwame Nahoy, John Kojo, and Evans Mensah, all appointees at the time, altered a report of this incident, which lays all the facts bare. This is a matter of public record, and were the author so inclined, he would have consulted this as he did with other documents in his possession. Now, according to what Mr. Hoy wrote in the book, when this matter came, we didn't explain the new details that we are getting, but former president was not happy with the incident, and according to Mr. Hoy, Mr. Hoy set up a 3-member committee. Their reports actually presented a different version as reported to him by Nana Akufo-Addo Rawlings. So this is the response from let's end with Mr.
Rawlings' personal opinions about the book and Mr. Hoy. He says very personal opinions have been sought by the author in his bid to sully the image of President Rawlings and Nathan Rawlings. He said a tall list of personalities take turns to offer their apparent view of the Rawlings-Mills relationship. It must be stated that the claim by named persons in the book that Nana Kunedu at a meeting with Professor Mills requested for the vice presidential slot is an outright fabrication, because there's an allegation that the Nana Kunedu had
wanted to be the running
mate. Exactly. And of course the husband said, former President Rawlings said that's not true. Nana Kunedu never requested, indicated or discussed with any individual an intention or desire to be the running mate to Vice President Mills. This book is quite unfortunately riddled with countless fabrications and assumptions ascribed to said individuals who were thought to have more honor.
And Mr. Rawlings and former President Mills, according to this statement, had a good relationship during the latter's tenure. They interacted several times via telephone and met a few times, either at the Ridge residence or at the Osu Castle. At all times, they treated each other with ultimate respect. These meetings were at the behest of Professor Mills, so it is difficult, according to him, to reconcile the so-called bitterness that Ahoy portrays in his book to the reality of the relationship between Mr. Rawlings.
But factually, if you existed during that time, Mr. Rawlings publicly, constantly,
absolutely
berated, criticized Professor Mills, and it's also, at least from the public point of view, I didn't know all this background, but it got a sense that the man didn't like Professor Mills that much. But he himself says apparently, whilst all this was happening, was constantly criticizing Professor Mills. Professor Mills was kept on going to him for counsel. Well.
So, Evans, in conclusion, he says that the book appears to have no aim of serving history with facts. It reads as an opportunistic and calculated attempt to ridicule him, Mr. Rawlings, and former First Lady Nana Kunedu Rawlings, using the personality of the late President John Atta Mills as their bait. From the inception, the author has harbored his own parochial agenda, which clashed naturally with the integrity and accountability of him, Mr. Rawlings. Those of such ills will continue to attempt to rewrite history to suit their selfish ends. But discerning minds, according to Mr. Rawlings, will no longer be recipient of or willing to tolerate such political trickery and subterfuge.
So this is an 11-pager. It's going to go onto my journal shortly. You could get a copy of that and read for yourself. If you've heard all the allegations against former President Rawlings, this is an opportunity to put everything out in one piece for you to appreciate his side of the story, as we've done. And so the bits there, a huge chunk of this though reserved to talking about his wife and defending her, and then the relationship with former President of the late Professor Mills, who of course passed just before the elections in 2011. On 12 rather. Still listening to news top stories on Joy 99.7 FM here on your dial. Remember that Christmas has come early for all Vodafone Cash subscribers. You secured and convenient Vodafone Cash is the only network offering you a chance to send money to all networks via Vodafone Cash free of charge. Yes, you heard me right, free. No other network can give you such an amazing offer except Vodafone Cash. Just send any amount to loved ones as many times as you want to any network without paying any charge at all, zero. So what are you waiting for? Make payments, show your love, make contributions, send money, all you want via Vodafone Cash to all networks for free. Dial *110# to send money for free. Ready.
Hey, Charlie, my network is really killing me.